Jeremy Steele, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. It is fun to finally meet you today.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Now, I hear that you are a Star Wars fan. Now, are we talking
like
Star
a mega
Wars
fan.
classics?
I've watched all the Star Wars many times. I don't own anything Star Wars. I used to own the VHS tapes until that was not a thing that you needed to do anymore.
Yes, I remember having those. If you've ever seen like those YouTubes where they compare the original Star Wars with how they've like totally changed everything and added new like sound effects and video effects and all that kind of stuff, I'm like, wow, it used to kind of really be cheesy, but they've done some magic, I guess, and done some cool things to it.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think of all these new shows that they're putting out on Disney? Have you watched any of those?
I've watched some of them. Some of them are pretty good. I like the one, The Mandalorian. That was super fun.
That was amazing.
But yeah, it's just too much. I don't have the amount of time to sit and watch the quantity of shows they're putting out. Nor am I so into Star Wars that I feel like I have to watch them.
Yes. I have a diehard friend who's a Star Wars nut. His name is James, and he is absolutely livid at the new movie, all the new shows and stuff. He's like, they have left the canon. They have committed blasphemy. So it's part of his religion, I think. But
oh, wow. No, I get that. I have some friends who are just like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't watched the newest one. I heard enough bad things about it that I'm just like, I don't really feel like I need to watch
I'll
that.
go to the theater and watch anything with a lightsaber in it, but yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I'll watch. It's like they're just throwing out sci-fi action flicks that are in the Star Wars world now.
Yep,
And
for sure.
I'll give it a try, but yeah, I haven't got around to the newest TV show they just let out.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
just like,
I never even know that they let them out. So
yeah, they're doing that. Well, you've got this like TikTok page and Discord and podcast and books, and so you're kind of a social media presence. And you asked to come on the show. You sent me an email, and I saw like your thing was Skeptic Pastor, and I'm like, we need to talk. We need to have a conversation. Where did that name come from?
Well, when I was figuring out how to do TikTok, I realized that, one of the things that TikTok values, that the audience there values, is sort of face front videos, unless you're some sort of big production company, and authenticity, and just sort of being who you are in the world. And if I had to boil my entire personality and life down to two words, it would be skeptic and pastor. Like I am a deep skeptic, also a pastor.
Mm-hmm. I can feel you on that one. Like it sounds contradictory.
Yeah, and it is, and sometimes it really kind of, the skeptic part, I sort of match with what people think that should be. Usually I'm not 100% sure that God exists ever 100%, but there's a lot of times that I'm pretty sure God doesn't exist. And the pastor part is the part that people have a question about, often because they grew up like me in the evangelical movement, and the pastors are supposed to be the super Christians who believe everything 100% and in some places, they also can heal people. I'm not that. But for me, the role of a pastor is to help people connect with the divine. And we do that through beliefs and practices. And so what I say is I show up on TikTok and all the other places as a pastor who is there to help people find spiritual beliefs and practices that work for them. And by that, I mean beliefs and practices that help them be the best version of themselves, and that help them find a purpose greater than themselves. Because there's like all this research that's been done that confirms this really interesting, basically what it says is that people who have a sense of a personal connection with the divine, the universe, Jesus, whatever it is, they feel less stressed. They It actually, when you look at the data, it operates as a protection against the recurrence of depression, all sorts of positive things to having spiritual beliefs and practices that work for you. And now a lot of people have been completely wounded by the church. The church stuff is not some of the things that can be those beliefs and practices. And so I know that's been my whole life as a pastor, doing that kind of work with people. And so if it turns out that God doesn't exist, I have used my life on helping people have a better life. So, at the end of the day, I sort of take comfort and solace in that, in my skepticism.
That reminds me of this short story. I believe it was Dostoevsky wrote it. I'm going to have to look that up. But it's about this priest who is in this small town in, I think, Eastern Europe. And he is like this gregarious personality. Everyone loves him. Everyone flocks to him. He's got this huge parish. And then this one skeptic comes to town. He's a young man. And he kind of, the family wants this young man to like get to know this priest so that he'll convert him. And so he kind of is like this forced arrangement, and they're getting together, and it turns out the priest is actually an atheist. And the guy was just like, I can't believe that you're an atheist. You're like the pastor of the town. You're the priest of the town. What's going on? And he's like, well, this is the best way I know how to love these people, is to do this. So it's a real short story, and it ends up, he doesn't convert the guy, obviously. But then this atheist young man becomes the next priest of the town when the man dies.
Interesting.
And it's just a really interesting story. I'll have to send it to you. It's a short little story, and it's an open, it's back in the 1800s, so it's all open source. So you can
I could totally see that, myself ending up as that person. I really like there's a show called Grantchester.
Oh, I love that show.
It's
so good.
I love it because the priest, it's kind of like he's like a priest, but he helps a cop out. He drinks a little bit. I love it because it shows him as like an actual human being.
I know, they're like drinking, smoking, and playing, was that Othello in the bar all the time?
I don't know what it is that they play. I don't know that game, but yeah, I love that. I love
backgammon. It's backgammon. That's what
I look at that and I'm like, this is my fantasy world, right? Adding, solving crime. Solving crime.
That's a great show. We watched that. That's a great show. So the skeptic pastor, I was having a conversation. I'm a pastor at a congregational church in a small town. And we do a lot of community work, and I don't really feel a need to convince or convert anyone to anything. I just want to be a good presence in the town. Yeah. And I have been described as the only honest pastor I have ever met by some people. It's like, so I'm just pretty open with stuff I don't know, stuff I'm not sure of. And, it's my dogma has whittled away to a couple of short prayers that I hang on to from St. Francis and St. Julian of Norwich. So,
yeah, I feel that I get this similar kind of comments, and part of it is, I say like, ultimately, everybody chooses beliefs, either because they've inherited them and they've not really looked at them, which is what I think leads to what people call deconstruction, which I don't really like the term. We can get into that, but. And so if you get to choose them, right, if you're going to do that, like, why not choose the one that makes you more loving, more accepting, bringing more peace and justice in the world? Like, if you're going to choose those, right? And if you end up being wrong, like, I am sure I'm wrong about half of what I believe. I don't know which half. Maybe it's more than half. But, like, I'm going to try of the beliefs that I'm going to choose. I'm going to choose the ones that are more loving. And then if I'm wrong, at least I was more loving, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think if I can boil God down to one sentence, and it is out of the Bible, it's God is love. It's like, okay, I really can't argue with that, No,
for sure.
Yeah. So if I can then, model that out in the world in some way, then I think I'm doing all right.
Yeah. And that Shameless plug here. That is one of the chapters in my book entitled "How to Not Suck as a Christian."
A great title. That's a great
Believe
title.
God is love is one of the chapters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was talking with a skeptic just the other day, and he kind of gave up on church, and he's just not sure what he does believe anymore. And
Right.
I said, well, ask this question to yourself: what do you wish God was like?
Oh, yeah, I love that.
And it's like, if you can imagine a God that's that good, like, I mean, if you can imagine it and then God isn't that good, like, what kind of God is that? Like, it's
Right.
So what do you wish God was like? I'm sure God is better than that. And so he's thinking about that question this week.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So you're a pastor. You grew up kind of in the church. What was that like growing up, being you in church, and how were you introduced to the faith?
I grew up just going to church. Like, my parents brought me to church. Always went every Sunday. And my church was a mainline church that was in the Southeast, the deep South, basically in the panhandle of Florida, which is basically Alabama. And a lot of those churches, though they are mainline, they are actually just Southern Baptist evangelical churches, right? Mm-hmm. You go from one to the other, and you would be able to tell no difference really, except maybe they talked about communion differently, but you'd have to be a big nerd to even really notice that. Yeah. So I grew up there, and I've always been a person who questions, right? I've always had questions and doubts, and sort of sought answers for those. And in that world, there were people who would give you answers, right? So when you find out there's a difference between what evolutionary biologists say and what the book of Genesis says, you ask the question and they give you answers from creation pseudoscience, right? It's not any way scientific and completely debunked, but they tell you that the Bible is right and scientists are wrong. And so little by little, I just sort of like accepted all the answers to my questions that they gave me, because those were the authorities in my life, right? Those were the people that had graduate degrees in theology, pastors, right? And so I grew up as a deep skeptic, but in a world that only gave me access to a limited number of very wrong answers. And so what happened as I grew older, and as I experienced more of the world and met more people who had, training, little by little, the brainwashing of my evangelicalism started to fade, and my skepticism sort of never went away, right? Being a deep skeptic my whole life. I'm assuming from when I was tiny, because I have memories of going on walks with my dad and talking about the theory of relativity, right? Like when I was in elementary school, I was just always completely broken like this. And so, I have had moments of deeper doubts, dark nights of the soul. I was married, and my wife at the time, we had a miscarriage, and I was a pastor at the time, and I had all of these questions. I didn't believe God exists, and how could all this happen? And so sort of like a normal life of ups and downs. And then I started to go to seminary. So I started in youth ministry, as a lot of people do. Then I went to seminary. And even though it was like an evangelical seminary, this one actually had legitimate academics, and they were teaching academic consensus, right? Documentary hypothesis, all of the stuff. But they sort of trained us with access to the real tools of academia when it comes to religion and ancient texts. And so when you've got the real tools, when you can read academic papers and understand them, you very quickly start realizing, oh, all of this evangelical stuff, all of this rapture stuff, all of this dispensationalism stuff, it is a complete sham that was invented very recently. And then you're letting go of it. For me, it was lucky. I was a little lucky because my moments of realizing that I had inherited beliefs instead of forming beliefs came at a time when I was given tools to really investigate things deeply in seminary. And so that was a unique benefit to my process of figuring out what it was that I believe. And so and this is where I come, and this is my own personality, I think, in part, but where I come down on the term deconstruction, because I think it's helpful when people say they're deconstructing their beliefs. I feel like they found one of the threads that is like messed up in this sweater that's been constructed, and they start pulling at the thread, and all of a sudden things just start unraveling and unraveling and unraveling, and it's all of these beliefs that have been built up over time, and what happens is all those beliefs end up shedding a lot of those beliefs because it turns out they weren't true. They didn't match their experience of the world or of life, or they made them worse people, right? When they lived according to those beliefs. And there is a sense that people have when they talk about deconstruction that this is a process that they will go through and they will come to an end. They will reconstruct and they will be in a better place. I don't think that's accurate or helpful, because I think what's happening when people's beliefs fall apart is that they're realizing they're coming to this moment where they realize they have inherited beliefs that they didn't critically, they didn't think about critically, right? They didn't investigate. They didn't try to figure out how they match with their world. They didn't do any of that stuff. They just accepted them. And really, the work that they have to do is the work that everyone has to do every day with beliefs, right? When new data comes up, you analyze it, you think about it, see if it matches. You might incorporate it, you might reject it, you might do some sort of testing, like living with it. And that's just called being a spiritual or religious person, right? That's every day. And really what you got in this deconstruction moment where the beliefs fall apart is you end up with like a backlog. You've got a bunch of these you've got to process through. But what I tell people is I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is you're just doing the normal thing of life and there's no rush to complete it. The bad news is you're going to be doing this for the rest of your life. And so it's just part of what it means. And so for me, that's my life. I am constantly learning new things, collecting new data, trying to figure out what I believe. Something happens. Somebody I know that I love has some sort of question or crisis or thought that I've never encountered. And it shakes me sometimes and I have to figure out what that means. But yeah, that's my story. And eventually I let go of all of it in some ways. And I would say that like in the book, How to Not Suck as a Christian, I make the argument that God is pro-choice, that queer people are in no way condemned by the Bible, that racism is still alive and well in our churches and needs to be called out, that atheists are doing okay and we should chill out with the atheists and maybe learn from them, right? That, I mean, like all of these things. And the way I came to those is because I completely sucked as a Christian and as a pastor with these sort of evangelical expectations and beliefs. I did some of the worst things that you do, either as a member when I was younger or as a pastor when I was older. And ah, like deep regret over a lot of that. And so in some ways, like I'm an expert at sucking as a Christian, which is my main qualification for writing that book.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I think we all have like these belief systems that like they form a system of this is how we are to be in community together. You know, you need a common mythology, and then you need an identity and a role. And when you dish that out to folks, I mean, we do this all the time in all these different places. The difference that Christians do is we put a capital T truth on it and be like, all those other arenas out there that, you know, have these other identities and mythologies, they all suck. Ours is the real one.
Well,
We got to get everyone inside of here.
I would push back on that. And I would say Christians don't do that. Fundamentalist
Also,
evangelical Christians do that. Like the Christians in my world, in my stream, and in all the Christians that I like am in community with, they don't put a capital T truth on anything. They are very open to the stories of other people, of other faiths, and finding God's truth in those, and to say that there is a capital T truth and that anyone has discovered it is sort of fundamentally opposite of what they would say is authentic Christianity.
yeah, I'm finding those Christians a lot more now that I'm more vocal about how I don't have the capital T truth.
Right. Yeah.
It's almost like within a lot of church systems, you have to adopt that mentality, or you can't belong. Sure. And then you do a lot of damage to a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
When they just can't conform to whatever standard it is in whatever manner, whether it's belief or behavior, or even just, you know, this is me, my gender, sexuality, like can't conform to this. And we just wreak so much damage with that. And
the damage is I think more pervasive than we initially realize, right? Because I think a lot of people's initial realization is the damage that they have experienced, right? Like I have experienced this, like I've inherited this homophobia and internalized it within myself and sort of made myself feel guilty. But as you begin to process some of that, I think the next layer that a lot of people encounter is that all of these things didn't just damage me. They empowered me to damage other people, which has also damaged me. Like I now feel not just like the woundedness in related to the people who wounded me, but I feel the woundedness in the way that I wounded other people.
Yeah. I'm teaching philosophy to high schoolers right now because we run a inclusive homeschool co-op, says non-religious.
Okay.
And someone asked me to teach philosophy, and I'm like, I don't know philosophy, but I'll dive in. So this is my second semester doing it, and when I dove into Descartes, like Rene Descartes, you know, the guy who said, I think, therefore I am, like he just doubted everything until he can get to the thing that he couldn't doubt, which was I'm a doubting being. And then he tried to then build back his belief system. But the funny thing was, like, if you look at the belief system that he built back, it actually wasn't, it was everything that he gave up. But then he said is now valid, but philosophers are like poking holes in this whole reconstructed philosophy. Like he didn't do a good job on this and this.
Well, and I remember being in a freshman philosophy class in college and being like, why did he stop there? Like I can find 100 reasons to doubt that he is a thinking being, right? Like, I mean, it's just a funny, you like peels away all these layers and then you get to that and you're like, this just seems just like an arbitrary stopping point. You read his argument for it and you're like, there's like 100. You're like, what if it's a fiction? What if you're in a dream? What if you're somebody else's dream? Like, what if, But it's just
Yes.
I find the deconstruction, Descartes' deconstructionism fascinating in the arbitrariness, both of his stopping point or slash starting point, and in the way that he reconstructs what he once was.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, everything I did believe was correct. Okay, I can put all these things back in my basket. We're good to go.
Yeah.
One of the things in philosophy that I learned was the word metaphysics, like the nature of reality. What is the nature of reality? And like, I am starting this. I'm in the early stages of this. I'm just been voicing this in the last few podcasts I've done, but I'm starting to learn a difference between theology and metaphysics. And like, there's a theological thing we call the Trinity. Does that mean metaphysically, if we peel back reality, we're going to see like a 3-person God sitting at the forefront of all creation running things? I don't think it does. So I'm like skeptical of metaphysics, but I'm also like, I understand the richness that a theology like the Trinity can have, where God is love and relational love, and you need 3 beings in order to have this thing where they're both giving and receiving. And it's like, this is really cool, beautiful theology, very meaningful. If I were to slap a capital T truth on that and say that that theology also describes metaphysics, I think that's where we're like messing up as religious people.
And I don't, and see, I think my problem is that I think that taking principles from one, from one discipline to another is ultimately not helpful. Right. So I don't find that taking the principles of quantum physics and applying them to marine biology is ultimately helpful. Right. And I would say the same thing about philosophy in a lot of ways, that philosophy can help grow your understanding. Like the frameworks of philosophy can help you investigate theological concepts. But the idea to me that philosophy and theology are the same thing, and therefore should immediately sort of cross-pollinate conclusions, I would say no. I would say for me, it's like, no, these are 2 fields with 2 separate sets of tools, and they'll come up with insights, and sometimes those insights are similar, sometimes they're different, and it's not because they are wrong. It's because there's 2 different tools that have discovered 2 different things, and it has to do with the tools we're using as much as it has to do with the reality that we're exploring.
Mm-hmm. I like that, the different tools we're using.
Yeah.
Is, growing up, you were given all these like apologetics for, like, the young earth creationism as opposed to science in this way. And so we're trying to make the Bible do science. And then we have all these weird scientists, pseudoscientists, like pulling out all this pseudoscience from sacred text. And it's like,
it's garbage.
It is.
Let me just be clear. That is,
I think we hit a soft spot on this one. But I think we did that with philosophy too.
We're about to get into it. Apologetics is complete garbage. It is trash. It hurts people. It has ruined people's lives, and it positions Christianity as a fight. And
yes,
you look at the Jesus story. It is not a fight, right? There are people that come at Jesus, and it's not a fight. Nobody is trying to prove that they have one absolute truth. And I think that it damages. So when apologetics is taught, right? First off, it's like the medium is the message, right? And so there is this underlying thing that like we need to teach you to defend the faith. That like defending the faith is an important thing, which means that your faith is under attack. And the only way to deal with that attack is to win the fight. But your faith is not under attack. That is not a thing. And Christianity doesn't have to be proven right, because Christianity, big C Christianity, has very few threads that are universal, right? And what ultimately is happening is people are being brainwashed and indoctrinated into a very tiny, very narrow viewpoint, theological understanding of Christianity that has all of these things named out, and so that they can then have perfect confidence that they are right. And then we train them in the arguments against it, where every argument that I have ever heard can very easily be completely debunked, right? All of these arguments use logic fallacies to quote unquote win the argument. But if somebody is educated in logic and in logic fallacies and in philosophy, it takes 2 seconds for them to say, I'm sorry, there are like the one I'll never forget. And this I mentioned in my book, How to Not Suck as a Christian. I was taught this thing from C.S. Lewis that it's called The Lord, Liar, and Lunatic. That like Jesus said these things, that he was God, which he actually didn't say, he implied, that he did all these miracles, whatever. And so what C.S. Lewis says is that means that either he's lying, and if he was lying, people would be able to tell that he's lying. And people don't follow liars. They don't amass whatever. Or he was crazy, right? To say or imply that he is God, like that is crazy, right? Either and the lying stuff is like lying about miracles, right? I rose someone for the dead. Well, there are people right there. Like if that didn't happen, it didn't happen. So there's the Lord, there's the lunatic, like he's mentally unstable, and he thinks he's God, and like that's not gonna fly. That's gonna start a movement that lasts for millennia. And if he is not a Lord, if he's not a liar, if he's not a lunatic, then he has to be who he said he is. But that's a false dichotomy. And really, actually, it's like a false trichotomy. But like it is saying that there are only 3 choices, when like all I have to do is just take 2 seconds and think, what other choices could it be? Maybe his followers invented him. Maybe his followers lied about him so that they could amass more power and more influence. Maybe the things that were written about him that we have to make our inferences about who he was, the Lord, Liar, and Lunatic inferences, are not accurate. Like there's a million other things. And like, but what happens is we teach kids or adults apologetics, and we gear them up to be the worst kind of Christians who are fighting with people all the time, telling people they're wrong, going to hell all the time. And we set them up later when someone who can think a little deeper, or who they respect and they're in a conversation with, points out the very simple ways to thwart these arguments, to have all of it unravel. Like apologetics are the worst.
I'm with you on that one.
Sorry.
Like if you just look, you got on a rant. It was a good rant. It was a good rant. Like as soon as I mentioned,
I can't with the apologetics. I'm sorry.
I grew up in that camp. I've since left that camp very far.
Same.
But yeah, if you just look at the Gospels themselves, like we have Mark, the earliest rendition of it, not a lot of like miracles, not a lot of teaching going on in there, just not a lot of dialogue. And then it totally evolves by the time it gets to John and is written, some people say around 90 AD. And it's like all of a sudden is like this, mystical divine being, and he's very human in Mark. And so it's like you have an evolution of the theology, even in the Gospels themselves as they're writing it. So yeah, you only have 3 choices. It's like, well, maybe if you read only this gospel, but what if we also include these other gospels and the evolution? Even if you look at like Luke and how the gospel that's tied to Acts, Luke Acts, and how the church evolves in the book of Acts. It's like it's constantly changing. It's constantly learning things. And it's like, oh, we were wrong about the thing. And it's like there's just no room in that apologetic understanding of the church to, like, every verse is true and self-sustaining, And it's like, no, it changes and it evolves and it's moving, and you have to be prepared to learn how it's doing that in the Bible, and then where it's supposed to go from there. It doesn't just stop changing and evolving, in 90 AD. Like, we're supposed to keep the ball moving, I think. So,
yeah.
So we got on a rant. That was a good one.
Yeah. And I what bothers me is, it just, it bothers me when we actively do things that set people up for failure and deep disappointment, right? It's just, I hate that.
So I got a theory about why we do it. The theory,
I would love to hear it.
All right. My theory about why we do it is that, the bigger a movement gets, the more control you need over it. And so, what we can't control what science is discovering and saying. We can't. So we then have to invent our own science, because then it stays in the bubble of our control and manipulation. And by our, I mean like the people at the top of the hierarchical structures of church, and especially fundamentalist evangelical. They need a self-sustaining bubble of everything you ever need, every question you'd ever ask, and every answer you're ever going to find will happen inside this small little bubble. And we can control all the language, we can control all the answers, we can control all the behaviors. And if you divert from that, then we have to kick you out of the bubble, because now you don't fit inside of it. So I think it's all about control and manipulation of small little worlds that we create, so that we can control them, and the people within them, and maintain control over it. That's why we can't accept, whatever God is taking the whole of humanity. We just say, no, we don't actually adopt your sciences. We don't adopt your sociology, psychology, all that stuff. No, we got it all in here in our little bubble. That's my theory. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I think that's a very generous explanation. I would say it's about money and power. Like sort of extending what you're saying, that what the bubble does, the sort of motivation for it is that if I centralize power in myself, if I tell you, not directly, but if I sort of brainwash you into understanding that that what I say is the truth and not what other people say is the truth, then I can easily manipulate you into doing what I want, and to giving me money to do what I want, right? And so I think the motivation is actually money and power, and what the bubble does is it keeps all the resources, all the power, all the money inside the bubble, and it makes it very easy to manipulate people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and money and power, I think, are probably the driving force there, for sure. Because even if it's not the greedy pastor, but like even a small church pastor who doesn't make a lot of money, like I have to make sure the money is rolling in to keep the budget moving, to keep the, right. Like it doesn't have to be a greed thing so much as we are serving and worshiping the necessity of mammon and money in our churches. Then therefore we have to maintain these bubbles that keep it flowing.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of the institutionalization, right? Like, whether it's a congregational independent church or a large denomination, we create systems that end up being expensive. And what that does is it puts pressure on people and on those organizations to maintain themselves. And when they lose effectiveness, when a program loses effectiveness, in the institution protects itself, protects the program, protects the structure, protects what's been built up, instead of jettisoning it, right? Mm-hmm. And so then there's the pressure that exists is to continue to fund that stuff. And the problem is you're now funding it with less people, with less resources, and with people that don't believe in it. They might say they believe in it, but they don't show up, they don't contribute, they don't volunteer. And so then it's on the pastor or the church leader's shoulders to get more money out of people. And yeah, it's just a complete mess, which is, I think,
I like what you said there.
Why the lie of tithing is perpetuated.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like what you said there, that it creates this necessity and then it puts the pressure on the people to keep it moving. And like, that's a lot of church abuse is just from that, the burnout, absolutely. Where I was the person who volunteered for this thing, and then I was the one who had to keep that thing moving and moving and moving, and then I just burnt out and had to leave. And then I ended up giving up a whole bunch of stuff with that, even just that pressure. There's so many. Yeah. I know more ex-pastors than I do pastors for the first time in my life at this season of the game. And that's saying a lot.
I feel that.
Yeah, and ex-Christians too. I know a lot more ex-Christians than I ever have. So you have this, you got a new thing called Skeptic pastor, but you were a United Methodist pastor for a while. What was it like being a pastor?
I am a United Methodist pastor.
You are.
I am.
Okay.
I am ordained in the United Methodist Church.
So what is it like to be an ordained pastor and a deep skeptic? What kind of complexities did you see and experience?
It's interesting. Part of what the reason that I can be a pastor in the United Methodist Church is that we are not a confessional church. So we have a couple of things that we hold as like core. But everything else, we sort of are a community that tries to make statements about things, but those are not binding statements. We are not saying this is the one true way to believe about, environmentalism or gun violence, right? We are 100% for gun control and against the proliferation of guns in our society, but that's not something that you have to adhere to in order to be a pastor or a member or any of that. And that comes out of this, the tradition. Our founding dead white guy, his name was John Wesley. And John Wesley is known for his doubts. Multiple times in his life, he had seasons of deep, deep, deep doubt where he was not sure he was a Christian. He was not sure about the whole thing. And even up to just a couple of years before he died, right? And he had this thing that he said that is sort of an anchor for this denomination. That is, he said, except for that which strikes at the roots of Christianity, we think and let think. So we think, like, we have our own ideas. Our members have their own ideas. Our church has their own ideas. We have, groups of people that come together to craft statements about our own ideas, but we let other people think differently. And we let them go in peace. And we say, you have different thoughts. That is okay. We generally have different degrees as to how wrong we may think someone is based on how far they are from what we've developed. But if you're a thinking person, we think and let think. In fact, I don't know how big of a nerd you are. Um, I am super nerdy on a lot of things. Words are one of my things. Um, and John Wesley is responsible for coining a term. You look up in the Oxford English Dictionary, and for all the people who aren't super word nerds, the OED, if you look up a word, it gives you the definition, but it actually gives you a history of the definition.
Oh, that's
what
cool.
It meant in 1600, what it meant in 1400, and the first time it ever appears, and who said it. And the John Wesley has one credit in there, and he wrote an obituary for a guy named George Whitefield, who was around at the same time as him. George Whitefield was an amazing preacher. Everybody loved him. They swooned at his words. He was a horrible movement builder. And John Wesley and him disagreed on a lot of things. And at the end of George Whitefield's life, there was not much to speak of as far as organization, following, that kind of stuff. At the end of John Wesley's life, he had over 100,000 people involved in the Methodist organization. That was a sect within Anglicanism at the time. But in this obituary, he said, we disagreed on this and that and this and that, but we were trying to do the same thing. We were trying to help people connect with Jesus and connect with God. And so we agreed to disagree. And that's the phrase he's responsible for coining. Yeah, agree to disagree, which is another way to say, except for that which strikes at the root of Christianity, we think and let think, right? We agree to disagree. And so as a person who's a deep skeptic, it means that I can say, I have permission to disagree. I have permission to say, I'm not sure about this. And to be completely honest and not kicked out, not defrocked, right? And so that's part of how I exist in this space. And in addition, it is a space that's really focused around grace and love. And that's where I feel like my theology has to be. We have this belief that the grace of God, the love of God, is extended to absolutely everyone all the time. And it's not something that just takes you and transforms you into something that gets you into heaven and maybe helps you afterwards, but it's fully in all of its fullest form offered to people all the time. People experience it all the time. All of that kind of stuff really makes me say, I don't believe all of it. There's a lot of stuff I disagree with. But if I have to look at all of Christianity, it's the closest thing. And that's where I am. I don't like the term Christian. I don't like to call myself Christian. I prefer to say I'm a practitioner of Christianity. And because that is what I am, because that's what I know. That's what I know the most about. But yeah.
I like that, practitioner of Christianity. That's really good. That is really good. We're also a congregational church, and we are not creedal. We're covenantal. And so we actually have 7 singular sentences that everyone is free to interpret according to their own conscience. And you have to not have uniformity of thought in our church, but so much more of you have to hold your belief in a way that keeps you in covenant with us. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, I can be here. I can't be at 98% of the churches that are out there, but I can be here at this one because of that. That's what I can say the things. I'll get up on a Sunday and, our reader will get up, he'll read the passage of scripture, and I'll just tell people, I don't like this passage. This is not a fun passage. I would have gotten fired for saying that at some of the other churches, but this one I'm just that's not cool. But here's what I did find about it, and here's why I don't like it, and here's some valuable things that are found within it, and so there's some freedom there.
Yeah, and I was Nav Press, who owns the Message translation, is getting ready to put out a teen study Bible, and I was one of the writers on that. And they gave a lot of permission to be honest, and I picked all the verses that I was afraid what people might write, but because like there's like one where God just kills a bunch of people, and my first sentence is like, this is not a good look for God. Right? I think that, yeah, it's one of those things that like, yeah, you just have to be honest. That's like when it comes to my beliefs and my doubts, that's what I've got to do. And the other thing is that like, I often don't share my personal beliefs, about any particular thing. I'll share a range of beliefs because I don't want people, especially people who grew up in evangelicalism, they have this almost reflex to accept what somebody in authority says is the thing, is what they believe. And so as best as I can, where I don't feel like I'm compromising ethically, I try to not do that, because I like that. Because I think it's really important. It's what you were talking about.
Mm-hmm. I did a passage, I think it was a couple months ago, and Jesus was talking, judgment language and stuff. And it was just like, all right, we can't get around not talking about hell today, so we're just going there. And everyone just got real tense. And I was like, Here are the classic 4 interpretations of the afterlife. And I just gave the 4. And everyone was like, you mean there's more than one? And I was like, yeah, these are the 4 ones. Here's where they came from. Here's
always how old they are. More than one.
There's always more than one. And I did at the end say, that I'm a universal reconciliation person. So that's where I personally stand. I know some of you might not be there, but that's where I stand. But I presented all 4 of them, and people were like, that was so helpful. We didn't know there was more. That's just that folk religion in America is evangelical fundamentalism. It just pervades everything.
It runs deep.
Sprinkling of nationalism in there as well now. But
unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, you have a new Discord church for people who don't like church. So I
have this thing called Not Church. I've got sort of grew out of TikTok. Got like 125,000 followers on TikTok, so you can find me there, skeptic.pastor. And if you actually just start typing in Skeptic, I'll be up at the top. And that community started to want a place to gather, and so we started a Discord called Not Church. That grew out of somebody saying, "This is all the things I wish that I had in a church." People exploring spiritual beliefs, asking questions, being there for each other, right? There's like a holding space area where prayer request kind of thing. But it's all that, but it's also nobody's telling you you're going to hell because you don't believe the right thing. And so we have people who identify as like mystics or Wicca or Christians or post-Christians or agnostics or whatever. They're all in there, and we're all in there together and being there for each other. It's a beautiful place. And so the way we manage that is through Patreon. It's patreon.com/skepticpastor. It's $3 a month. And the reason we charge for it is because I'm not going to ask people to give donations. You pay for what you get. If it doesn't work, you just stop paying. And so that's how Not Church works. And it is a fun and wild place. And people who are skeptics, people who are like this, really find some wonderful community in the Not Church thing. And then I also have a podcast called the Unbelief Podcast. And on Mondays, I do a like long form teaching on like a sort of progressive, culturally sensitive, like ancient culture stuff about mostly the Bible. And then on the other days, we sort of alternate between telling people stories of deconstruction and talking to like smarty pant people that have written books or have PhDs and stuff like that. And it's a whole lot of fun, the Unbelief Podcast. And you can go to unbeliefpodcast.com, but you can just search Unbelief everywhere, and it's pretty easy to find.
Cool. That is cool. Well, what are you, you're about to release your book. Tell us about.
Yes, I love this book. It's How to Not Suck as a Christian. And if you want to find out more about it, howtonotsuckbook.com. Howtonotsuckbook.com. But it grew out of TikTok. My community there helped me come up with chapters. And it's an orange cover with big black letters that says How to Not Suck as a Christian. And I sort of imagine it as a gift book that you might buy and place on the church's coffee table. Maybe in the church that traumatized you. I don't know. But it's a lot of fun, and we're about to start in January. We're about to start some of the sort of pre-release campaign stuff. And if you go there and you're interested in it, there's a little form you can fill out that says, "Hey, tell me more about this," and I'll shoot you an email when we're doing the like signed copies and street team stuff. And it's a lot of fun, and it's full of stories about when I sucked as a Christian. Like the chapter on abortion and why God is pro-choice starts with me telling you about holding signs, anti-abortion signs on the street, which is just humiliating. It makes my stomach turn. And then how I got to the other end, the other side of that. So, it's a super fun book. There's a lot of snark. There's a lot of like personal stories. And I really can't wait for people to get a hold of it.
Nice. Well, this podcast is going to drop on season 4 in January, so it'll be real close.
That's awesome. That's great.
All right. Well, I'm going to put links in the comments to all the stuff that you're doing so people can find you pretty easy. And Jeremy, thanks for coming on and having a conversation. It was a lot of fun. We got to ranting and it was good.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate it. This is fun.
It was fun.